I think I noticed it more with and I do feel like it was more older crowd that played the Unified, but that when there was a couple of kids that you could see that they're probably more used to a Minecraft or a Fortnite,
Mhm,
you were
mhm.
just like, "Oh gosh, I don't think they're familiar with some of like what platform players would consider just the usual sort
Right,
of
right, right.
the standard pace of a platformer." So that is hard, but how much do you I think when your target audience is for the hardcore platformers,
Mhm.
how much do you bastardize that to onboard? Because I feel like the first we've definitely tried to make it so and before Sage, we'd maybe play tested with about 10 people of varying gaming skills.
Mhm.
And one thing for sure was that I would watch people get better at the game and they would get up to levels that they'd watched the previous person play, saying, "There's no way I'm going to be able to do that." And then just through going through the tutorial and the curve of like the difficulty curve in the game,
Mhm, mhm.
they were actually doing it. And so for me to say, you've actually just gotten way better at platforming, like, and like, so that's encouraging. And
Mhm.
obviously, because you want to bring new people into the platformers, into that realm. But yeah, I think the target is, for better or for worse, people that want that next challenge. They've finished Super Meat Boy, they've finished Celeste, and they're looking for those games that
Mhm.
are which is why there's big emphasis on story, because we want the player to feel really compelled. Like in Celeste, you kind of like you really want to finish because you want to help Madeline get to her goal. You know what I
Mhm,
mean?
mhm.
So that's what we've really tried to make sure there's some emotional like story beats in the game, so that when you feel like giving up, on top of like a real fast respawn and very forgiving checkpoints,
Mhm.
very frequent checkpoints. Sorry, we're trying to make sure that it's for players that want to play like a hardcore precision platformer,
Mhm.
but we're also trying to make sure that people don't bounce off because they don't feel any reason to put themselves through something like that. You know what I mean?
Right. I think at the very least, you need to make sure that players are aware of the tools they have. I don't
Yeah.
think you need to hold their hands too much, but like for instance, a lot of platformers don't introduce wall grabs from the very start. That's oftentimes an ability you unlock later on. So making the
Yep.
player aware that this is something you do right from the very start of the game, make them aware that character swapping is a thing and the different characters have different abilities. I think doing that I is kind of enough to really get the player moving. I understand not
Yep.
wanting to go and like hold their hand for a couple of levels, anything like that. But
Yeah.
for someone who maybe this is their first position platform, maybe they've played Celeste, but they never like, progressed too far in it. I
Yep.
think at the very least, knowing what you can do is what you should be aiming for.
Yeah. I think with our game, with the unified, you learn in the second room. The only way to get out is to you basically cling onto the wall and jump up and get the key, and then the door opens. And you
Mm-hmm.
also learn about the time lasers. And then we let the player sort of have that bigger room to sort of just feel around. All right, I can jump, and like it's good to I was really, the main thing, because then they go through the tutorial, and the dash part of that tutorial was hard, because you have to, when you switch to Kinsey, is the harder player to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Renzo is sort of like your daily driver. Like, he's the grounded player. Like, he's the one that will, if you don't need to be Kinsey, it's easier to be Renzo, because he just feels more, he's easier to control. Kinsey, the blue guy with the dash, but you know that tutorial, that very first tutorial, the first level, that is the tutorial that says, all right, press L2 to switch, and then once you've switched, press this button. I think it's square on on a PlayStation controller.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Press the square button and a direction to dash. But they have to get through. You have to jump and get through that hazard to get to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely is something that is harder for people to do than I thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
And then before they leave the level, then they kind of go into this pit, and then they have to kind of do a duck jump. So if you duck and then press jump, it gives you like a super jump. And then you have to combine that with an upwards dash, because to get out of the level, it's the equivalent of like a 20-foot jump. So there was a few people that just struggled to make it out of there. But everyone that made it out of there, you kind of set up
Mm-hmm.
for what you need to do next. But what's good about that is that's the only time text is in the game. And the very next level, You walk in, and there's just a bunch of big industrial fans blowing air upwards.
Mhm.
And if you just jump into them, you get minced.
Mm.
But everyone was like, "Oh, if I jump and then hold the heli, you hover up."
Yeah, I
And it
think
was,
that is very self-explanatory. Like
yeah,
a lot of like, even if you never played a game before, like even someone who's older, like you think of like Mary Poppins, right? You
yeah.
like sort of understand that idea that
She would be able to hover up. Yeah,
right. It's such a trope that so many things have used that even if you've never played a game before, you can probably work that one out.
yeah. And then a few levels later, where people started to, and again, such lengthy debate. When I say debate, it's me going back and forth. Jalen's a bit like, just tell me whatever you think. I don't know. Like,
Uh-uh.
that's your department. I'll code it in. But there's a bit where you, rather than just like duck jumping and then up dashing, you have to use Renzai to hover, but the reach of the fan ends, and you're still like
Mm.
several feet from where the ledge is. And so that's the first time you have to combo out to Kinsei and dash up.
Mhm,
So the
mhm,
way that we've tried to explain that is, I don't know if you remember that there's a few working computers left around the lab, and you
mhm.
can go in and read emails, and it's observations that the scientists have made. But so many people skip that, again, being at a con, and we're like, this is what you have to do. And if you don't read and the PC has particles sparkling around it and an arrow going like this to be like, press up here and you can read the email.
Mhm.
But if people don't check that, it's like, what do you do? You're not going to figure it out unless you, yeah.
One little thing you can do with that a lot of games will do is highlight a keyword.
Ah,
So they'll use like a different font
valid,
color or
valid.
different font size for whatever word is important.
That is
A lot of detective games will do this, for example.
that is valid. Yeah, because sometimes, because that's that's actually a pretty valid. Yeah, that's a very valid point, because we do mix story beats
Mhm.
and tutorial slash hints on those emails. So
Mm,
some of
mhm.
those emails will be about, hey, like Greg from HR stepped on a mine and he died. Like, that's kind of to be like, don't step on the mines, you will die.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
the ones with the drone wings will chase you. But other ones are to do with like, we have to move subject 3 away from like da 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 because da da da. Da. And so some of them are story and some of them are hints.
Mm,
So that's valid, because yeah, if you just go, "Oh, yeah, this is another story beat. I don't care about the story. I just wanna do the platforming."
mhm,
Yeah, you'd miss important information, especially when you, go through the mod pods.
mhm.
Like, the upgrades are kind of written almost like lines of code, so it's probably worth highlighting.
Mm.
Yeah. But it's so hard, like, it really is. It's almost like you've been a gamer your whole life, and then when you're making a game, you forget, like, how like in Celeste, for example,
Mhm.
very early in the game, you make a jump that you're not going to make, and it fully slows down and it says, do this,
Right,
and
right,
it'll
right.
get you out of trouble. Hit this button and you'll dash out of trouble.
Yeah,
And
yeah, the bridge sequence, yeah.
I love how they've done that. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it forced the player to just go for it, but then it kind of is like, gives you a little pat on the bum and is like, there you go. This is all you needed to do. And now you know how to do that thing.
Mhm,
But
mhm,
then,
mhm.
but then Super Meat Boy, on the other hand, they're just like, it's all done with the level design. It's like, you'll figure it out. You know
Right,
what
right, right.
I mean? But his mechanics pretty straightforward. Um,
I think why some people struggled with the the super jump and then dash up is it hadn't been separately introduced that you can do directional dashes, because the first dash you do is just a horizontal dash.
correct. Yes.
I think maybe if you had one other thing before that that did require
Yeah.
you to do an upwards dash, that I think would sort of alleviate that problem.
Yeah. That's also valid. Yeah.
Maybe
You
like
do kind of
once,
jump into the
maybe you
deep
go
end
through
there.
the laser, the spikes with the laser, whatever it is that kills you, and then you have to do another one that takes you upwards,
To
and
get
then
up.
that does the same. That sort of solves that problem.
Yeah. And then you do the combo. Yeah. And again, that's me being so overly cautious not to take up players' times with the
Mm,
tutorial, but
mm,
you can't leave them. You can't, if they bounce off because they're unsure, then that's even worse, isn't
mm,
it?
mhm.
Like, Yeah, no, that's super valid because you got to go. Yeah, that's your first dash and your second dash is like a combination.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing we have to make sure we iron out before we release is that yeah, we don't rush the player too much. And I have moved a few levels around that, the PCs, the old computers that you can read are peppered out
Mhm.
further so that you don't feel like you just, oh God, am I going to have to read an email every time I go into a room?
Right, right, right.
These emails, they're only a few lines and it's like, it's a cutesy little pixelated screen thing.
Mhm,
It's not like this big, it's not like finding a book in Skyrim and being like, fuck, do I have to read this? Do you know what I mean? It's pretty lightweight,
mhm.
but yeah, that's also very valid. Um,
Right, yeah, the text is a story and text is a very difficult one because if you're going into a game where the expectation is you're going to be hit with a bunch of story, like you're playing I don't know, you're playing an RPG of some sort, it opens with a 5-minute cutscene, right? Like that's sort of
yeah.
the initial expectation from that game. Like Skyrim, for example. You start Skyrim, you're in the cart, you're in a cutscene. It's like 3 minutes long. You do the character creation, then there's another cutscene. You
Yep.
know what you're getting into. But a
Yeah.
lot of indie games, unless they are marketing themselves as a story visual experience, especially with
Yep.
platformers, you are kind of expecting basically maybe like 30 seconds to introduce like the character and then right into the action. So anytime
Yeah.
there is this sort of lore dump at any point, that does tend to act as a bounce off point, especially early on where you're not really invested in the game. And you'll see this with a lot of games where you have like achievements for each section. And it's like, oh,
Yep.
95% of people get to chapter 1 and then 50% chapter 2.
Yep.
There's like clearly something happening in that point where people are bouncing, and that maybe it's look, some games it's okay to have that happen, but maybe there's a good reason that's happening and that should be resolved because players are going into it with sort of mismatched expectations.